Good afternoon, everyone. So, as we just said, I'm going to talk about the future of borders and really looking at the digital transformation of borders and also the digital transformation of how we travel. Before I start, I don't know how many of you are aware of SITA, so I've just got one quick slide on SITA itself. SITA is the IT provider to the air transport industry. We were formed over 70 years ago by the aviation industry itself. We're owned by the airlines around the world, including Kenya Airways, and we provide a wide range of services across aviation. We serve airlines, airports, but very critically governments as well, because aviation doesn't work unless we have effective borders and we're able to manage the travel across borders. I manage the border management business, and we work with over 80 governments around the world, many of which are in Africa. And as you can see on the map, we're really global. We've got over 40 locations in Africa itself, and we provide a wide range of different services to governments. What I'd like to start with is really looking at the future of travel. And we envisage a world with secure, safe, and seamless travel. And that digital travel vision is something that the industry has been talking about for a very long time, that governments have been talking about for a very long time, and is now beginning to hit us today. So I'd like you to imagine a world where you can travel from anywhere to everywhere without ever needing a physical travel document. A world where borders are frictionless, so you can literally step across the border on your arrival, and where every step in your journey, whether that's by air, land or sea, is seamless and using digital technology. The key enabler for this is really at the border, and therefore it's important to understand some of the challenges that governments face at the border itself. And if you consider really the primary role of the Border Management Agency and governments at the border, it's around two things, and it's about balancing those two things. First of all, it's about how do you protect your national borders? And there's lots of different threats out there. Unfortunately, the threat from terrorism hasn't gone away. There are over 5,000 terrorist attacks around the world in 2021. And whilst globally that's actually been reducing over the last few years, in Africa, in certain parts of Africa, we're seeing an increase in that sort of activity. So it remains the primary purpose of a lot of governments at the border. There are many other potential threats as well. We've got the threat from trafficking, in particular human trafficking, which remains and is a big growing issue around the world. We have a whole host of other types of international crime, and there are a lot of geopolitical instabilities. Clearly, in Africa, we have the crisis in Sudan that's been evolving, and that doesn't just impact Sudan, that particular country. It impacts all of their neighboring countries as refugees look for movement out of the country. And clearly the impact from health pandemics is also very much a big concern for governments around the world. We're hopefully coming out of the COVID pandemic, but the World Health Organization have identified 8 further priority diseases that could become the next pandemic. So we really need a way of managing our borders and protecting them, not just from security threats, but equally from health threats. The other key role of the border is around national prosperity. How do we open up our borders to promote trade and tourism into our countries? So we've got this real key balance we need to be able to manage. And tourism is a really key focus for many governments. So in Africa, there's over 7% of gross domestic product in Africa related to tourism. And clearly trade, and trade's been discussed a lot, particularly with the African Continental Free Trade Zone, how we can really enable that free movement of trade around Africa to really grow the economy and grow national prosperity. So there's a number of things there we really do need to be focused on. The way to get and achieve that balance between protecting your borders and in creating prosperity is really about digital identities and digital transformation of your border. And if you look at the key elements of that digital transformation, it starts with the seamless journey. It starts with the ability to be able to travel as an individual or for goods to seamlessly travel across borders. And the only way to really achieve that is through digital pre-clearance, really understanding who is it that is traveling into your country in advance of their journey and being able to pre-clear them ready for that travel. Now, digital pre-clearance has been around for many years. SITA developed the first digital pre-clearance solution over 25 years ago in Australia. In Africa itself, we delivered the digital pre-clearance solution for South Africa in readiness for the 2010 World Cup. And so a lot of this technology has been around for many years, but we've now got to a point where the adoption of the technology should be looked at across all countries around who can benefit from this. There are 4 other parts of the digital border that you also need to consider. The first is around the dynamic border. Pre-COVID, if I take you back a few years, pre-COVID, border rules very rarely changed, maybe once or twice a year. So my ability to travel into a country very rarely changed. During COVID, we were changing our border rules multiple times a week, to be able to manage the threat that the pandemic was presenting us. So we're moving towards a dynamic border, one that can change in real time based on real-time events. And that's going to be absolutely critical in the future. Borders of the future also need to be integrated. And we discussed about that a bit yesterday. Different government departments need to work together. So immigration, customs, police, health authorities, agriculture, they need a common view of the passenger and be able to make an informed decision about whether they can enter your country or not. We also need to make use of traveller data, and advanced passenger information is really critical to that, and the quality of that data is absolutely critical. And that will enable us to move to more advanced risk assessment techniques to really understand the threat that an individual or goods might be presenting at our border. And finally, and clearly a big focus of this conference, is around digital identities. How do we utilize digital identities to better to trust and be able to verify individuals before they even step close to your border? As my co-presenter from Kedium Banknote presented, the primary credential for that in terms of a digital identity is defined by ICAO, and we're looking at the introduction of the digital travel credential for international travel. In effect, it's a digital version of your passport, and it's available now. So the specification for that was defined by ICAO over the last couple of years. There's 3 types of DTC. The first type is available now, and it's a user-created digital travel credential. So the user can extract information from the chip on a digital passport or the information on the passport page to create a digital version of that passport on your phone. And that includes the biometric capability that's embedded into your passport. There's also other types of digital identities that could be used for more regional travel. So maybe a regional digital identity could be used in that way. You need to be able to, though, link that digital identity with the individual. And the way the aviation industry and the travel industry is really going is around the use of biometrics. And again, that's been discussed. SITA does a number of surveys each year, and our most recent survey identified that 7 out of every 10 passengers is very comfortable using their biometric to travel if it's going to make their journey easier. So we know that travelers are very happy using that. And globally, over half of all airports around the world are expecting now to biometrically enable every point in the airport process by 2025. So this is happening now around the world, and therefore you really need to think about this as part of your managing your borders. So how does this work? So first of all, we need to create that digital travel credential. As I said, you can use your passport to do this onto your mobile device and be able to read the chip using an NFC, verify the individual through a liveness detection by taking a selfie as well. And that information at the point of registration is verified against the ICAO PKD in the same way a digital passport is today. Having created it, you can then submit your digital credential as part of an authority to enter into a country. So if you're applying for an e-visa to enter into Kenya, in future, you'd be able to submit a digital version of your passport along with that e-visa application. So the government doesn't just have some basic information, they have the full information, including your biometric readiness in advance of travel. That can then be verified at the point of check-in using systems like advanced passenger processing, which enables a real-time check of that passenger at check-in and enables you as the government to deny boarding of that passenger if they don't meet the criteria and they don't have the authority to travel. The traveller, though, needs to be in control. Data privacy is really key, and therefore we very much promote decentralized identities as well. And I'll come on to a use case in a minute, a case study where we've delivered the ICAO DTC in conjunction with a decentralized verifiable credential. And that enables the passenger, the traveller, to select who they wish to share that identity with. So they can select to share it with the airport if they wanted airline access, or they want to be able to just drop off their bag and do a self-bag drop. They can choose to do that, share their identity with the airline. Or indeed, when you arrive at the destination, how can you just share your identity to attend an event, a World Cup, or enter your hotel? And because your information is on there, we can make that very specific to that use case. So the case study I was going to use, and there's very few implementations of digital travel credentials today. The one we're most proud to be involved in at this moment in time is the island of Aruba in the Caribbean. So a country that is very focused on tourism, wants to obviously protect their economy, protect their border, but equally they want to make it easier for people to travel into their country. So we've implemented a digital travel credential trial with Aruba. As I said, we've linked that with a verifiable decentralized identity. So it's standards-based, using open standards related to that travel, and very much following the same process that I've just taken you through in terms of the ability for the passenger, the traveller, to select who they wish to share that information with. So in Aruba, we actually originally started during COVID, and we were able to share COVID health credentials with the government in advance of travel. So every traveller who took part in the trial was able to submit that in advance, submit their digital travel credential, submit their health credential, and be able to access the country in a very seamless way. One final slide for me just to wrap up. There's obviously a lot that we need to do to achieve some very big things for our industry and for our countries. First of all, I would very much suggest you really start focusing on how do you plan for that digital border of the future. There is a lot of change going on globally. There's a lot of opportunity for Africa to actually overcome some of the legacy infrastructure that other countries have got by moving to more digital technologies faster. What I would also suggest is very strong collaboration between governments and the travel industry. So we work very closely, as I said, with airlines, particularly hotel groups and other travel organizations, cruise companies. You know, we're not just talking about aviation here, we're talking about land borders and sea borders as well. So how do we create that collaboration? And finally, it's about be involved yourself in helping define how the future of digital travel is going to evolve. So work with us to help define some of these evolving standards that are going to be so important to our industry. Thank you very much. If you would like to see any of the things that I've just presented to you, please come to our stand. You can see actually a demonstration of how that Aruba solution works, the creation of a digital travel credential, and using verifiable credentials. Thank you very much.
Before you vanish across the border, we have a couple of questions. Any question from the congregation? I have one across there.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Pam Dixon, World Privacy Forum. Quick question for you. So in regards to sharing this travel data, passport data, with third parties that are unrelated to travel, such as shops, stadiums, etc., that does introduce some additional framework requirements. What do you envision as a policy framework that would govern such data disclosures, considering that this would happen largely in international areas where national governance would not apply? Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, very good question. And clearly data privacy and other security concerns as we adopt digital identities is going to be really important. So the focus here is really about making sure that when you're defining those policies around the use of digital travel credentials or any other sort of digital identity, is making sure that those use cases are fully understood and defined within those sort of policy areas. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, if we are going to allow you to use a digital travel credential to access a World Cup stadium, and we've done something very similar recently in Qatar, then that particular use case needs to be well thought out to make sure that, again, you're only sharing information that is required for that purpose. You're not sharing the whole of your passport. You're not sharing necessarily all of your biometric data. It depends on what that use case is. And that's going to be really key when you think through your policy around introducing digital identities.
Two questions. Africa has natural disasters, war, and people fleeing for their lives. How do you see this with digital borders? And also, which area would you recommend governments implement first in their digital transformation journey?
Yeah. I think clearly, you know, when we do have a natural disaster or a regional conflict where individuals need to flee an area very quickly, quite often they're not going to be able to flee with all of their identity documents. They're unfortunately going to be traveling without that sort of capability. So ICAO have thought about that as within the standards. One of the standards is the Type 3 DTC, and that enables a digital identity to exist without a physical travel document. The other forms, they always recommend to keep your passport with you when you travel. Don't rely on that digital identity. But the Type 3 is one where agencies, the United Nations, could issue a United Nations citizen passport, you know, without needing that necessary identity. So we need to obviously prove the individual is who they are, need to be linked to their biometric or other data. But there are opportunities to use that digital identity technology when you have got those situations.
Two last questions. How quickly do you see us adopting or getting rid of our passports? And secondly, what are the major challenges facing the implementation of digital borders?
Okay, so I think we're going to be on a journey for many years. I think the Type 1 DTC is available now. We're doing trials around the world, and if your government is very much looking towards doing a trial around digital travel and digital travel credentials, we're very happy to discuss how that can work. The Type 3 DTC is probably many years away, and that's the ability to be able to securely, very trustworthy travel without needing to carry your passport. I think we're probably a decade away, but who knows? Technology evolves at a big pace. In terms of some of the challenges you're going to face, I think clearly here in Africa, one of the big discussions we always have with governments is around funding. It's around the infrastructure. I think one of the questions earlier was around the use of mobile phones when large parts of the population don't have smartphones. So that funding and infrastructure is key. And the other piece that I would always say is really consider what the regulations and the policies need to look like. Sometimes the technology is easy to deliver. It's much harder to actually implement that within your regulations and your policies around how you actually govern your country. So those are two big things I would mention.